Okay. Hello, hello. Good evening. Welcome, I guess. Welcome to a virtual space. It's probably a good thing that we're reading one of the Otherland books, of course, because the huge amount of the Otherland books was spent first on my part as the writer and later on the part of the characters is figuring out how to negotiate behavior in virtual spaces. A huge problem these days, although most of the virtual spaces are not quite as complicated as the Otherland network. But when you add, games and MMORPGs and things like that into the space, then yeah, it's getting there. It's getting there, and virtual spaces are very complicated places. Although most people wouldn't worry about it quite as much as I did, but that's all right. Anyway, hello, good to see you. I'm Tad. I will be here for the next hour. I will be reading from River of Blue Fire, and which is the second of the Otherland books, if for some reason you don't know. Although we seem to have the same people here all the time, so probably by now there's really no point in my saying much of anything. However, that never stops me, as people who know me are aware. So, one thing I wanted to share with you guys, just because it's the kind of thing that amuses me anyway, is I have a microphone. Let me move that back so you can see it. It's on a cord, so I can't really very easily show it to you properly. But it's the microphone that I am using and that I usually use. And it's been bugging me for the last couple of weeks because I thought I had an uneven spot on my desk or something because it wouldn't sit flat. It kept like moving a little bit. Every time I touched it, it would like kind of rock a little bit. And I was thinking, oh God, well, this is a very old desk. Maybe there's like a hollow concave space or something that it's sitting on top of, or partially. Anyway, so as I was preparing for the broadcast today, I finally went, well, maybe there's something underneath it. And I turned it over. And in fact, there was a piece of granola because I eat my breakfast at the desk and usually have a granola bar and a cup of coffee. So there's a piece of granola that's been under there for like 2 weeks, which has been causing my microphone to be unstable. And there's probably some metaphor to be excavated from there, but I don't know what it would be. Anyway, that amused me. I don't know if it amused you, but it definitely amused me to be spending 2 weeks cursing the slipperiness and bounciness of my microphone, only to finally think of turning it over to look. Oh, God, it's hard to be old and stupid. Anyway, what else was I going to tell you? Oh, well, if you are on one of my Facebook pages now, there is a review the first actual review of The Splintered Sun, which I am pleased to say was very nice, very kind, 5 out of 5. It doesn't give away anything, although it does mention a few different plot strands and characters and things like that. And I am not suggesting that just because it is a good review that it is the full and entire truth of the book, and others may differ entirely, may in fact want to hunt me down and kill me when they read the book. I don't know why, but they might, because the world is full of people and people are different. But anyway, so I just thought I'd mention that as well. I'm very pleased to get such a nice review on the first review of The Splintered Sun, especially because it was a long time in prep, as I was trying to figure out what to do and what I wanted to do and how I wanted to do it. And those who have been listening to me, for the past year or two, if not longer, oh dear, I hear Deborah upstairs being upset with Lemon. Anyway, she's had a bad chewing habit. I mentioned last night she's been all freaked out because Deb has been not well, and Deb has been locked up in another room to keep Lemon from jumping on her. And as a result, Lemon has taken it out on various articles of importance in the household, including 2 of my newer pairs of shoes and a TV remote and one of our daughter's stuffed ugly dolls. Took the foot right off. And various other things I can't even think of right now because she's a young dog and she is upset to have Deborah behind a closed door and me not always around, although most of the time I am. But every now and then I do have to, do a reading, and that's when she got one of my shoes last night was when I was doing my reading. So anyway, so just wanted to mention that about the review because it's after a long gestational process. It's nice to see that it seems to be, at least to that reviewer, what I wanted it to be. So happy with that. What else? Well, as you heard, Lemon is upstairs getting in trouble. Johnny is not getting in trouble because Johnny never gets in trouble. Johnny, even before he was old and didn't give a damn anymore, which is where he is right now in his life. Even before that, though, he was always extremely cautious. And when we first got him, he was a rescue like Lemon. And when we first got him, the whoever it was, the fostering agency or something, had talked about how quiet he was and that he was like a puppy ninja because he was about 7 months old when we got him. Already pretty much the size he is now. But so we were kind of interested by this, although that wasn't why we had anything. It had nothing to do with the adoption, but just that was like, what an interesting thing to say, a puppy ninja. And we got him home, and indeed he was very quiet and cautious the first couple of weeks. And then we realized what was going on is that Johnny just had this thing of like, I want to know what the rules are, and then I will obey them, and I will obey them to the letter. He just was a dog that really wanted to know what was accepted and what was not accepted. And once he figured that out, then his personality, which when he was younger was very bouncy and, all the kinds of things you'd expect of a young dog, began to come out. And in fact, we live in an octagonal house. I don't know anybody knows that who hasn't been here, but we live in an octagonal house. And the way it's set up is that at one point, before we put in a couple of gates for Johnny-related reasons, you could run all the way around the house. Not that we ever wanted to do it, but Johnny did. And when we would come home and be inside the gate, and therefore in the part of the house that he had, the part of the property that he had access to, when he saw that we were here, he would just start running around the house at full speed and, bounding up onto the porch and then leaping off it over the stairs at the end and then around the house again and up the porch and then off the porch and just whoosh. So it wasn't that he was just a quiet dog or a shy dog. He just was a dog who really needed to know what the boundaries were and what the rules were. Whereas Lemon, like most of our other dogs, doesn't give a single fiddly fart about what the rules are. She makes her own rules as she goes. She is another, I have to say, very happy, very self-sufficient dog. So, but unfortunately sometimes we run into problems, and that's what's going on with her at the moment. She is not happy to be kept away from her people in any way, shape, or form. She is very people-oriented, as apparently most pit bulls are. Anyway, so if I have babbled enough now, let me quickly just check and see who has showed up, and then I will start reading because there are many things to read. Kelly Kenrick is first up, and thank you, Kelly, for posting that kind review and all the other nice things you've been putting up lately. It's much appreciated. There's Ray Weatherford. Hello, Ray. Good to see you. Welcome aboard. Claudia, hello from hot and soggy Virginia. Well, having watched some of the 4th of July festivities on TV yesterday in passing, I can certainly grasp that it is hot and soggy there, and you have my sympathies because I don't know anybody who likes hot and soggy, with the possible exception of giant Chinese salamanders and T-Rexes. But other than that, I don't know anybody else who would opt for hot and soggy if they had a choice. Tim Speckens, hello, greetings to you and to all of you from Tim, who hopes that everyone survived their July 4th parties. My July 4th party was nothing. I think I mentioned last night, I had gone out the night before, and I was just, between the inflammation issues and other stuff, I was so worn out after driving most of the week on various errands and things and medical appointments, and then up to San Francisco on Friday night, that I didn't want to do anything, and thankfully I didn't have to. Oddly, for the first time ever on 4th of July, we didn't hear a single firework, which may seem sad in some ways, but believe me, as any dog owner will tell you, it was a relief because the dogs hate fireworks, and we didn't have to deal with that this year, so that was grand. Anyway, going along. Who else is here? Kristen Rule. Hello, Kristen. Good to see you. Tracy McClatchy. Hello. Good to see you too. In quote, see. Yes. Well, actually, you can see me, can't you? I can't see you, but I can see your post, and that's almost as good. Isaac Tim. Hello. Isaac says that he's alive and getting better, and those are two very good pieces of news to have. So, Isaac, I'm glad to hear that you are finally getting over the flu, if I remember, which is no fun. Kristen is at a beer garden, and the World Cup is on. You know, it's really interesting seeing the World Cup filtered through the American experience, and particularly the 2026 American experience, because I have been through the World Cup in Europe, specifically in England, but I have been around the run up to the World Cup in other countries as well. And there is there's certainly something to it. You know, it is along with the Olympics, and unfortunately both get highly politicized, but it is among the truly entertaining things to get, you know, countries from all over the world together to do something. So excellent. And I'm glad, Chris, and I hope it's not too noisy, and I hope you're enjoying yourself. Mr. Mark Craigbaum is here, and as always, welcome and welcomed. Jill PB, hi all, checking in from Concord. Hello, Jill, good to see you. Susan Shamblin, greetings to you too. Braulio Valdebenito Maturana. Braulio Valdebenito Maturana. Hello, Tad, happy 4th. Other than buying your books, how else can we support you? Buying my books is plenty. And honestly, at this point in my life, I have had so many nice things happen to me. We are currently, fairly financially responsible and in no immediate danger. So I appreciate the kind offer. You can continue to interact with me on social media and stuff like that. That's always appreciated. And with all the stuff I say at the end of the broadcast every time, or at the end of the reading every time, that is all about passing it forward or paying it forward. And that is absolutely my chief thing. So you want to do something nice for me, which I appreciate, do something nice for somebody that you know who might otherwise be ignored or underserved in some way. And I may not know about it, but I will feel it deep in my karmic meter or something. But anyway, so thank you. And what an excellent name you have, by the way. Braulio Valdebenito Maturana. And I am so jealous. I think Tad is okay, but it isn't really me. I mean, it is me, but it's not a name I ever felt described me in any way, shape, or form. Williams, of course, is like the third or fourth most popular last name in the world. I guess it could have been worse, as I've said before. I was born Robert Williams, Robert Paul to be specific, and I would have had to choose between like Rob, Robbie, Bob, Bobby, things like that. And I can't think of anything I would have been less excited about being than Bob Williams. It just does not really fill me with excitement at all. So enjoy your wonderful name. It's a great name. Kristen says, most of the crowd is cheering for Mexico. Well, we've got a lot of Mexican Americans and Mexicans visiting or traveling in California, so I'm not surprised. Melissa Fuller, hello, how are you? And Melissa says she is delighted to be able to join all of us from the sunny Kootenays, if I'm pronouncing that correct. Kristen is giving me an ongoing. Kristen, I can't tell you because I don't have the World Cup on, but maybe somebody else on the phone is being, or somebody else on the reading is aware of what the who's leading 2-1. Kristen can't tell from where she is who's actually leading. It's a 2-1 match at the moment. Mark asks, so Lemon is being chewed out by Deb. Well, a few minutes ago, definitely. Yeah, I heard the definite sound of Lemon, which usually means something not good has just happened. Tracy McClatchy says, do Kongs and peanut butter help Lemon? Something to chew. Oh, believe me. That is the kind of thing that she likes. And we have more chewing stuff. There are things they make specially for pit bulls because they're such devoted and assiduous chewers, and she goes through them all. We found one kind of ball that she really cannot chew to pieces, and we keep buying those, and she leaves them scattered all over the house and the yard, but those work. And she kind of chews on them in a contemplative way. It's like an addiction or something. When she's in a certain mood, she will go and run and find one of her orange and blue balls and just sit there chewing on it meditatively, like calming herself. Okay, who else is here? Andre, hello, good to see you. That's Andre Tagasella. Who else? Dip, dip, dip. No, Deb doesn't have a stomach virus, but she'll be okay soon. Maggie, oh no, Magpie, Midas Dottir. Hello, good to see you. Thank you for joining us. What country is red, white, and green? Now, well, that's almost certainly Mexico, because I think Italy, which is also red, white, and green, has been eliminated from competition unless they're re-showing that particular match. Let me see here. Deborah Thomas, hello, good to see you. The husband and her are creating a little free library in our yard. Excellent. And that is a way of paying it forward too, and I love that. Excellent. Trish Laubacker, hello, good to see you. Mr. Ron Hyde, hello, Ron, good to see you too. Hope everything is okay with you, and I hope you had an excellent time at your various science camps, which I know you've been doing. So lovely to have you back with us. And with that, I am going to start reading. The last we had heard was Orlando and Company had lost their boat. They figured out that they have to get on the river to get out of this particular simulation, which is the bug world. Whereas we've just spent a great deal of time with Rini and Kabu, and now Cullen, who just had his arm bitten off by or his arm swiped off by a giant bug. But so they all want to get out of the bug world, although Rini and Kabu are having their own side adventure, not with the rest of the group. So they're trying to figure it out, and they finally decided a way that they could build a boat that might help to get them out using a leaf and then a fretwork of struts, basically. So that's where we are, and and that's Orlando, Fredericks, and the rest of the group. Continuing with River of Blue Fire, the sun was high overhead, already past the meridian and heading for its setting point somewhere on the far side of the river. Orlando was discovering how far he still had to go before he'd be even at his normal level of fitness. The tactor settings were either simply lower here, or some of Thargor's more superhuman characteristics didn't translate into the Otherland network. Certainly the barbarian's famous indefatigability was absent. Orlando was dripping with virtual sweat and exhausted by very real aches in every joint and muscle. Fredericks was not any more cheerful, or at least his sim face looked red and uncomfortable. He stood up from where he was forcing in the last crossbeam, wedging it into the leaf by using a piece of sand big as his two fists as a hammerstone. "We're ready for the mat now." Orlando gestured to T4B, then climbed gingerly over the edge of the leaf and down onto the beach. They had chosen a smaller leaf than the one that had brought them here, but even so, it had taken them a large part of the morning just to drag it down to the river's edge, and Orlando felt as if he had been chopping with his sword for days to cut enough of the bamboo-like grass shoots to weave the frame. William, piercing together the last fibers of the coarse mat, had been forced to saw the tiny shoots used in its manufacture with a jagged stone, and he did not seem to have enjoyed his task either. "Whose bloody idea was this?" he asked Orlando and T4B. He asked as Orlando and T4B trudged up. "If it was mine, take this heavy thing and hit me with it." Orlando no longer had the strength or breath for jokes, even the stupid ones that had helped him through the hard work earlier. He grunted, then bent and grabbed one edge of the mat. After a moment, T4B leaned over with an answering groan and found a handhold of his own. "Oh, for God's sake, you sound like a couple of Tasmanian washerwomen." William struggled up from his seated position and walked to the far side. "You pull, I'll push." Together they wrestled the mat over the curled edge of the leaf, then, with a great deal of swearing, shoved it more or less into place. "Finished, True?" asked T4B, hopefully. No. Frederick sucked his lower lip thoughtfully. We need to tie this down. Then we need to cut something long enough to make Orlando's pontoons. They're not my pontoons, Orlando growled. I don't need any damn pontoons. They're for the boat. William rose, a pitch-black scarecrow, his tassels and fringes fluttering in the breeze off the river. You two tie the mat down. I'll go look for some old bloody reeds to make the outrigger thingies. But when you get done resting, Orlando, my chuck, you can come cut them down. You're the one who brought a sword to the picnic after all. Orlando nodded a weary assent. And why don't you come with me, Bang Bang? William continued. That way, if something with too many legs comes sneaking up on me, you can bash it with your big metal fists. The robot shook its head, but rose unsteadily and limped after the departing death clown. Orlando watched them go with something less than complete satisfaction. Sweet William was right about one thing, anyway. If this were an adventure game, Orlando could have relied on his allies with definable and helpful powers. Swiftness, agility, strength, magical abilities. As it was, except for Martine's new input, the group's only real skill seemed to be at dressing funny. He slumped, waiting for the inevitable summons from Fredericks, but in no condition to anticipate it. A pair of giant flies swooped and barrel-rolled like vintage planes above a bit of drying something or other a short way up the beach. The noise of their wings made the air vibrate until it was almost impossible to think, but there was a kind of beauty in them, too, their glossy bodies rainbowing as they caught the sun, their swift beating wings an almost invisible iridescence. Orlando sighed. This whole Otherland thing locked, basically. If it were a game, the rules would be defined, the moves to victory comprehensible. Games made sense. How had little Zuni from the Wicked Tribe put it? Kill monster, find jewel, earn bonus points, wibble wobble wobble. Not much like real life, maybe, but who wanted real life? Or even this bizarre variation. No rules, no goals, and no idea even of where to begin. Hey, Gardino, are you going to sit there working on your tan, or are you going to help me finish this? He stood, sighing again. And what had they learned so far that would take them any closer toward their objectives? That they were trapped in the Otherland network somehow? That they needed to stay alive until Sellers could get them out again? That somewhere in one of who could guess how many simulations, a guy named Jonas was running around, and Sellers wanted them to find him. A needle in a haystack the size of a locking galaxy, Orlando muttered as he clambered onto the leaf. Fredericks frowned at him. You shouldn't sit in the sun so long. You're getting woofy in the head. Another hour had passed, and none of the others had returned. The sun had sunk behind the pinnacles of the trees, throwing vast fields of early night across the riverbank. The leaf boat lay in one of them, and the local weather was almost chilly. Orlando, grateful for the relief, was dragging another long reed back toward the boat for use as a barge pole in shallower waters when something big came hissing out from under a pile of stones. Frederick shouted a horrified warning, but Orlando had already seen the dark blur at the corner of his vision. He threw himself sideways, rolled, and came up without the reed, but with his sword in his hand and his heart hammering. The centipede was at least a half-dozen times as long as Orlando was tall, dusty brown and covered with bits of crumbling earth. It came toward him in a strange side-winding fashion, forcing him to give ground. Except for movement, it was hard to distinguish the creature from the background. Orlando was grateful there was still a little daylight left. A shudder ran through the creature, a ripple of its armor plates, and for a moment the centipede's entire front end lifted from the ground. Orlando thought he could see pistoning spikes just below its mouth and had a sudden, maddeningly distant memory that these creatures were poisonous. The front limbs dropped, and the beast rushed forward on dozens of segmented legs, bearing down on him like a fanged monorail. Orlando could hear Frederick shouting something, but he had no attention to spare. Years of Thargor experience rolled through him in half a second. This was not the kind of high-bellied creature you could get under, like a griffin or most dragons. But with all those legs, it would strike sideways very quickly, perhaps faster than he could matador out of the way. With a noise like a small stampede, the centipede was on him. Orlando sprang from a crouch even as the thing's front legs tried to hook him toward its mouth. He clambered up onto the head, then had time enough for one stabbing blow to what he hoped was the creature's eye, before it kinked in fury and threw him to the side. He landed heavily and scrambled back onto his feet as quickly as his throbbing muscles could manage. Fredericks was atop the leaf, watching in agony, but Orlando could think of no way his friend could help him without weapons. As he backed away, the huge bug bent itself in a semicircle, following him with its front end even as the rest of its body held in place. Unlike the mostly anthropomorphic creatures of the Middle Country, it gave off no suggestion of feeling or thought at all. It was simply a hunter, a killing machine, and he had walked too near its hiding place at sundown. Orlando reached down and grabbed the barge pole he had dropped, a rigid stem of grass twice his own length. He doubted it was strong enough to pierce the centipede's armor plating, but it might help to keep the creature at bay until he could think of something else to do. The only problem, he quickly discovered, was that he could not support the pole and hold his sword, too. He let the stem droop as the centipede began another side-winding charge and shoved the blade through his belt. He managed to raise the pole just enough to jab it at the centipede's head. It lodged so hard against the creature's mouth parts that if Orlando had not dug the butt end into the earth behind him, he would have slid right up the stem into the poisoned fangs. It bent, but did not snap. The centipede, arrested by something it could not see, rose, clawing toward the sky until its first 3 pairs of legs were off the ground. The reed straightened and popped free. Released, the beast thumped heavily back to the ground, hissing even louder. Orlando dragged the stem backward, looking for a new position to defend. The far end of the reed had been chewed to pulpy splinters. The centipede lockstepped toward him again, more cautiously this time, but showing no signs of going away to look for a more compliant meal. Orlando cursed weakly. "I see the others!" Fredericks was shouting. "They're coming back!" Orlando shook his head, trying to get his breath. Unless their companions had kept some big secrets, he couldn't imagine any of them making much difference. This was pure monster killer work, and Orlando was one of the best. Or was it Thargor who was one of the best? "Jeez, listen to me," he thought blurrily, dragging the pole up into a protective posture again. Sharp things clashed in the shadows of the centipede's mouth. "Can't tell the difference between one kind of not real and another?" He jabbed at its head, but this time he could not get the reed seated against the ground. The bug shoved forward, and the long stem slid to one side, off the dirty brown carapace, catching between 2 of the driving legs like a stick in bicycle spokes. Orlando hung on to the pole as it jerked and flung him through the air to one side. He landed hard enough to squeeze the breath from his body. The great multi-legged shape swiveled into a tight turn, rippled forward 6 steps, then reared over him, legs hooking inward like 2 hands worth of giant snatching fingers. Orlando scrabbled backward, but it was a hopeless attempt at escape. The centipede lifted and stretched farther, its killing parts locked in place above him like some horrible industrial punch press. Frederick's distant voice was now a meaningless shrill, fast disappearing in a rising wash of pure sound, a great storm, a slow explosion, but all somewhere far away and meaningless as Orlando struggled to lift the heavy stem one last time. In this moment of slow time, death was upon him. The universe had nearly stopped, waiting for that ultimate second to tick over. Then the second crashed upon him with blackness and wind. A cold thunder blasted down from above, a vertical hurricane that blew him flat and filled the air with stinging, blinding dust. Orlando screamed into dirt, knowing that at any moment he would feel poison spines hammer down into his body. Something struck his head, throwing stars into his eyes, too. The wind lessened. The darkness grew a little less. Fredericks was still shrieking. Orlando opened his eyes. He squinted against the swirling dust, astonished to discover himself still alive in this world. Stones as big around as his thigh rolled past him as an impossibly vast black shape, like a negative angel, rose into the sky overhead. Something slender and frenetic and comparatively tiny writhed in its talons. Talons. It was a bird as big as a passenger jet, as a shuttle rocket, bigger. The explosive force of its wings, which had pinned him at the base of an invisible column of air, suddenly shifted as the bird tilted and vaulted away, the centipede still struggling helplessly in its claws, on its way to feed a nest full of fledglings. "Orlando! Orlando! Hey!" Fredericks was keening softly, far away, unimportant compared to the awesome sight of a certain inescapable death being sucked away into the evening sky. "Gardner!" He looked up to the bluffs above the beach, where Sweet William and T4B had dropped their bundles of reeds to stare in astonishment after the swift-rising bird. He turned to Fredericks and the boat, but they were gone. A heart-stopping instant later, he saw that they were only displaced, that the new leaf boat they had so laboriously built in one place was now quite a way distant. It took a moment for his dazed mind to put together the information and realize that the leaf was on the river, blown into the water by the bird's flapping wings, and was drifting slowly out toward the strong current. Fredericks, alone on board, was leaping up and down, waving his arms and shouting, but already his voice was growing too faint to understand. Befuddled, Orlando looked up to the bluffs. The two figures there had finally seen Frederick's situation and were making their way down the mossy bank as swiftly as they could, but they were a minute's run away at least, and Fredericks was only a score of seconds from the current that would sweep him away forever. Orlando picked up the barge pole like a javelin and dashed along the beach. He sprinted toward a headland, hoping he might be able to extend the long step to Fredericks, but when he got there, it was clear that even with 3 such poles, he would not be able to reach his friend. The leaf caught for a moment in an eddy, buffeted between the faster current and the small backwater below the headland. Orlando looked at his friend, then back at T4B and Sweet William, still distant and small as they ran toward him across the strand. He turned and scrambled down the headland, got a running start, and flung himself off into the backwater. It was a near thing, even in reasonably warm water. Orlando had almost run out of strength and was wondering what had happened to his legs, which he could no longer feel, when Fredericks reached down and plucked the floating barge pole from the water. Orlando was just deciding that traveling to a virtual universe to drown seemed a long way around for a person with a terminal illness when the centipede-chewed end of the pole slapped down next to him, nearly braining him. "Grab it!" Fredericks shouted. He did, and his friend helped him struggle over the edge of the leaf onto the mat they had spent much of the afternoon weaving. Orlando had strength only to huddle down out of the evening wind, shivering as water drizzled off him and the river swept them away from the beach and their 2 astounded companions. "It's yours, Scourus," the captain said. "It's Marapanui, on your system even as we speak." "Thanks. You're a mate." Calliope Scourus did not say it like she meant it, and to avoid any accusations of subtlety, she curled her lip as well. "That case has been history so long that it smells." "You wanted one. You got one." The sergeant made a wiping her hands gesture. Don't blame me for your own ambition. Make a last pass. Call the witnesses, if any of them are still alive. Call the witnesses and see if anyone's remembered anything new. Then dump it back in the unsolved list if you want. Whatever. She leaned forward, narrowing her eyes. Skouros wondered if the sergeant's cornea reshaping had been less than she'd hoped for. And, speaking on behalf of the entire police force of Greater Sydney, don't say we never give you anything. Detective Skouros stood up. Thank you for this rubber bone, O glorious mistress. I wag my tail in your general direction. Get out of my office, will you? It's ours, and it's impacted, she announced. The pressure vents on her chair hissed as she dropped her muscular body onto the seat. Meaning? Stan peered at her over the top of his old-fashioned framed lenses. Everything about Stan Chan was old-fashioned, even his name. Calliope still could not understand what parents in their right minds would name a child Stanley in the 21st century. Impacted, suctioning, locked up. It's a rotten case. This must be that Marapanui thing. None other. They finally kicked it loose from the real killer investigation, but it's not like they were doing anything with it over there. It's already 5 years old, and I don't think they did anything but look it over, run the parameters through their model, and throw it out again. Her partner steepled his fingers. Well, did you solve it already, or can I have a look at it too? Sarcasm does not become you, Stan Chan. She kicked the wall screen on, then brought up a set of branching box files. The case file popped to the top of the activity log, and she spread it out on the screen. Marapanui. Excuse me. Marapanui, Polly, 15 years old, living in Kogarah when she was killed, but originally from up north. A Tiwi, I think. He thought for a moment. Melville Island, those people? Yep. Homeless since she ran away from a foster home at 13. Not much of an arrest record other than vagrancy related. Few times for shoplifting, 2 offensive conducts. Locked up a couple of days once for soliciting, but the case note suggests she might actually have been innocent of that. Stan raised an eyebrow. I know, astonishing to contemplate. Calliope brought up a picture. The girl in the stained shirt who stared back had a round face that seemed too large on her thin neck, frightened wide eyes, and dark curly hair pulled to one side in a simple knot. When she was booked. She seems pretty light-skinned for a Tiwi. I don't think there are any full-blooded Tiwi anymore. There's damn few of us full-blooded Greeks. I thought your grandfather was Irish. We made him honorary. Stan leaned back and brought his fingertips together again. So why did it get pulled out of the dormant file by the real killer crew? Calliope flicked her fingers and brought up the scene photos. They were not pretty. Just be glad we can't afford full wraparound, Calliope said. Apparently, the type and number of wounds, a big hunter's knife like a Zeissing, they think, was similar in some respects to Mr. Real's work, but it predates the first known real murder by 3 years. Any other reasons they gave up on it? No similarities beside the wound patterns. All the real victims have been whites of European descent, middle class or upper middle. They've all been killed in public places where there was at least theoretical electronic security of some sort, but the secret security's always failed in some way. Put that damn eyebrow down. Of course it's weird, but it's not our case. This one is. Speaking of, why did you ask for this Marapanui thing in the first place? I mean, if it isn't a prostitute getting off by a client, it's a crime of passion, a one-shot. If we want casual murders, we got streets full of them every day. Yeah? Calliope raised a finger and flicked forward to another set of crime scene snaps, these from an angle that showed all of the victim's face. What's wrong with her eyes?" Stan asked at last, rather quietly. "Couldn't say, but those aren't them. Those are stones. The killer put them in the sockets." Stan Chan took the squeezers from her and enlarged the image. He stared at it for a dozen silent seconds. "All right, so it's not your usual assault whoops homicide," he said. "But what we still have here is a 5-year-old murder, which had a brief moment of erroneous fame when it seemed like the perp might be an important killer who's been splashed all over the news nets. However, what it really is, Scorus, is some other cop's leftovers." "Succinct, and yet gloriously descriptive. I like your style, big boy. You looking for a partner?" Stan frowned. "I suppose it beats cleaning up after cake dealers and charge heads." "No, it doesn't. It's a shit case, but it's ours. My joy, Scarus, is unbounded." It was never an easy choice on office days between taking the light rail or driving the underpowered e-car the department leased for her, but though urban traffic ensured that driving was slower, it was also quieter. The auto reader was picking its way through the case notes, making bizarre phonetic hash out of some of the Aboriginal and Asian names of the witnesses. Not that there were many witnesses to anything. The murder had happened near a honeycomb beneath one of the main sections of the Great Western Highway, but if the squat had been occupied before the murder, it was empty by the time the body was discovered. The people who lived in such places knew that there was little benefit in being noticed by the police. As the details washed over her again, Calliope tried to push all the preconceptions from her mind and just listen to the data. By the way, in case I don't think it's actually connected in the first book, and I think this is the first time Calliope and Stan show up. But in case you didn't know, and there was some connection in the first volume that I've now forgotten 30 plus years later, Polly Maripanui case is in fact a murder, the first public murder committed by Dredd back in the day. So that's just so you know if you needed to know that. As the details washed over her again, Calliope tried to push all the preconceptions from her mind and just listen to the data. It was almost impossible, of course, especially with all the distractions that came from the tangled traffic streams humping along in fits and starts beneath the bright orange sunset. First off, she was already thinking of the killer as he. But did it have to be a man? Even in her comparatively brief career, Calliope had worked homicide in Sydney long enough to know that women, too, could end another's life, sometimes with surprising violence. But this bizarre, iron-nerved, obsessive play with the body, surely only a man would be capable of such a thing. Or was she sliding into prejudice? There had been a time only a few years back when some group in the United States, in the Pacific Northwest, if she remembered correctly, had claimed that since the majority of social violence was caused by men, and because there were certain genetic indicators in some males that might indicate predisposition to aggression, male children bearing those indicators should be forced to undergo gene therapy in utero. The opposition groups had shouted long and loud about the proposed law being a kind of genetic castration, a punishment for the crime of simply being male, and the whole debate had degenerated into name-calling. Calliope thought that was too bad, actually. She had seen enough of the horrifyingly casual bloodshed caused almost entirely by young males to wonder if there wasn't something to what the bill's proponents had to say. When she mentioned it to him, Stan Chan called her a fascist lesbian man-hater, but he had said it in a nice way. It was certainly true that she had to avoid making assumptions without the facts, but she also needed to try to wrap her mind around the person, needed to find the perp before she could find him, or her. For now, she would have to trust her instincts. It felt like man's work of the most twisted sort, So unless she stumbled on overwhelming evidence to the contrary, the person they were seeking would remain a him. But, beyond the assumption of a male perp, not a lot stood out, at least in the way of unifying themes. There had been no trace of sexual assault, and even the violence as sex aspect seemed oddly muted. In many ways, it appeared to be more ritual than rape. Ritual. The word had a vibration, and she had learned to trust the part of her that felt those kinds of resonance. Ritual. She would file that away. Other than that, there was little to go on. The murderer was not as thorough in his avoidance of physical evidence as the real killer, but Polly Marapanui's death had found her effectively out of doors, the only shelter being the concrete overpass, an area scoured by wind so that no useful traces remained, even to the department's hideously expensive 4-vac particle sucker. The perp had worn gloves, and if Polly had fought, she had not carried away any trace of her murderer beneath fingernails. If only the old superstitions were true, Calliope thought, not for the first time in her homicide career. If only dying eyes actually retained an image of what they last saw. Perhaps the killer believed that ancient superstition. Perhaps that explained the stones. The voice of the auto reader droned on, emotionless as a clock. The sign indicating her exit swam into view, a distant smear above the river of taillights. Calliope edged toward the left lane. No physical evidence. A victim that most would agree was as inconsequential as a human being could be. A handful of useless witnesses, mostly itinerants and uncooperative relatives. And a truly disturbing modus operandi that had never been seen again. Stan was right. They had someone else's bad case, with what little juice it had once possessed sucked out of it. But the girl, who had possessed nothing in life except life, was not entirely inconsequential. To declare that would be to declare that Calliope Skouros herself was inconsequential. For what had she chosen to do with her own days and nights except defend the resentful and avenge the unwanted? "That's inspiring, Skouros," she told herself, leaning on her horn as some idiot on his way home from 4 or 5 after-work beers cut her off. "But it's still a shit case." Fredericks was crouching in what would have been the prow if the Leaf were a proper boat, staring out over the rapidly darkening water. The river had carried them to this point without too much violence, but Fredericks had a firm grip on the fibers of the mat anyway. Watching his friend's head waggle from side to side with the motion of the water had begun to make Orlando feel queasy, so he was lying flat on his back, looking up at the first prickling of stars in the sky. "We've lost them all," Fredericks said dully. This was not the first time since they had been swept away that he had made this doomful remark. Orlando ignored him, concentrating instead on convincing himself that his scanty clothes were drying and that the air was actually warm. "Don't you care?" "Of course I care, but what can we do about it? It wasn't me who got stuck on this stupid boat." Fredericks fell silent. Orlando regretted his words, but not to the point of retracting them. "Look, they know which way we're going," he said at last, by way of apology. "If we, whatever you call it, go through, we'll just wait for them on the other side. They'll find a way to get down the river, and then we'll all be in the next simulation together." "Yeah, I guess so." Fredericks turned to face Orlando. "Hey, Gardner?" Orlando waited a few seconds for Fredericks to finish the sentence, then realized his friend wanted conversation. "Yeah? Do you think we're going to get killed?" "Not in the next few minutes, if we're lucky." "Shut up. I'm not spanking around. I mean it. What's going to happen to us?" Fredericks scowled. "I mean, I don't know. I miss my parents, kind of. I'm scared, Orlando." "I am too." As the darkness thickened, the immense trees sliding past on either side became an unbroken wall of shadow, like the cliffs surrounding a deep valley. Valley of the shadow of death, Orlando murmured. What? Nothing. He dragged himself upright. Look, we can only do what we're doing. If there were a simple way to get out of this, one of us would have found it already. Remember, Sellers made it hard to get here, so even if they seem like the Scan Master Club, sometimes Reenie and the others must be pretty smart. So we just have to hang on until we solve it. Pretend it's one of the Middle Country adventures. Nothing in the Middle Country ever really hurt. And you couldn't get killed. Not for real. Orlando forced a smile. Well, then I guess it's about time old Thargor and Piflet had a serious challenge. Fredericks tried to return the smile, but his was even less convincing. Hey, what do you look like? Orlando asked suddenly. In RL? Why do you want to know? I just wondered. I mean, are you tall, short, what? I don't want to talk about it, Orlando. Ordinary looking, I guess. Talk about something else. Fredericks looked away. Okay. You still haven't ever told me where Piflet comes from. The name. I said I don't remember. Fen. I don't believe you, so tell me. Well, Fredericks met his eyes defiantly. If you laugh even a little, you're impacted to the utmost. I won't laugh. After a character in a book, a kid's book, a stuffed animal, sort of, named Piglet. When I was little, I couldn't say it right, so that's what my parents called me. When I started doing the net, well, it was sort of my nickname. Are you laughing? Orlando shook his head, teeth firmly clamped. No, not... He broke off. A noise that had been rising for many seconds was now clearly audible above the rush and roar of the water. What's that? Frederick stared. Another bug? It's hard to tell. It's flying really low. The winged thing coming rapidly after them from upstream had dropped so close to the river's surface that one of its feet broke a wavelet into white foam. The insect tipped and wobbled and seesawed up to a higher level before regaining its course. It skimmed past them at an angle, showing itself to be almost half the size of their boat, then banked steeply along a long distance downstream and began to fly back toward them. It's going to attack us, Frederick said, fumbling for the barge pole. I don't know. It seems injured or something. Maybe sick? Orlando's attention was captured by something in the waters beneath the veering insect. Look, it's that blue sparkly stuff. Frederick stood and balanced unsteadily, intent on the low-flying bug. He raised the pole up above his head as it approached, as though to knock it out of the sky. Geez, are you scanned to the utmost? Orlando dragged him down. Fredericks had to let go of the pole to keep from falling, but saved it from bouncing overboard after he had fallen to his knees. That thing's 10 times your size, Orlando chided him. You hit it with that, you'll just get knocked into the water. The insect hummed closer. As it neared, already banking, Orlando crouched on all fours, ready to drop to his belly if it flew too low. The creature was some kind of tropical beetle, he saw, its rounded brown shell touched with yellow. As it swept past, Orlando saw that the forward part of the wing case had lifted, and that something was moving there, wiggling... Waving? He said in astonishment. There's a person in there. It's Reenie, shouted Fredericks as the insect buzzed past. I'm sure it's her. The glimmer was all around them now. The waters seemed to froth with glowing sky blue. Upstream, the flying insect was making a wide turn, but Orlando could hardly see it. The very air was full of dancing light. They found us! Fredericks bounced up and down. They're flying in a bug! How can they do that? I don't know, Orlando shouted. The noise of the river had grown to an endless wash, and blue light was leaping from his skin. The dark shadow of the flying insect was overhead now, pacing them, and it also flew through sprayed. Let me start that one again. The dark shadow of the flying insect was overhead now, pacing them, and it also flew through sprays of blue tracer fire. "We'll have some on the other side." And then the roaring overwhelmed them, and the light filled everything, and they passed through into another place. And I think we have time to start the next chapter. Chapter 9, The Hollow Man. Netfeed, entertainment. I loved the Papa Diabla. Could have done without the warm gazpacho. Restaurant review of Efulgencia's World Choir, Oklahoma City, USA. Visual, iguana con bayas on a serving platter. Voiceover. My other main complaint with EWC would not perhaps be a problem for other diners. EWC is one of the last to get on the random restaurant dining loop, and their use of it is aggressive. There must have been 6 changes of connection during our meal, which hardly leaves enough time to ask the new arrivals what restaurant they're in, let alone what they're eating, what they think of it, or anything else, before they've vanished and the next party has popped in. Now, I never enjoyed this sort of thing, even when it was a novelty, but clearly EWC is looking for a younger, crunchier, scorchier type of customer than yours truly. The pop-eyed, batter-fried iguana is another giveaway. The light was going fast. Rini, who had not felt confident for a single moment since the hopper had lifted into the air, began fumbling on the instrument panel for the insect plane equivalent of headlights. Realizing how many switches she could flick which would not be in her best interest to flick, she gave up and concentrated on maneuvering the little flyer through the overwhelming, monstrous forest. "He still seems to be alive," Kabu said from his crouch at Cullen's side. "Since there is no blood, it is hard to tell how much damage he sustained when that creature pulled his arm off. I have knotted his coat around the wound, in any case, and he is sleeping again now." Rini nodded, mostly intent on avoiding a fatal piloting error. It would be easy to mistake a shadowy tree limb for part of the greater darkness, and from the perspective of their own skewed measurements, the ground was several hundred feet below them. She had contemplated trying to fly higher, to reach a place above the treetops, but she didn't know whether this plane could be expected to fly safely at an altitude of what could be equivalent to thousands of feet. And in any case, she liked her chances of not hitting anything better down here, where the trees were mostly trunk. "Are you sure he said the river was in this direction?" she asked. "He said west. You heard him, Rini." She nodded and realized her teeth were locked so tight her jaw hurt. She unclenched. She had received enough glimpses of the sunset through the trees until just a little while ago that she actually felt confident that they were flying west, but she needed something to worry about, and whether they were headed in the right direction was, in total contrast to all their other difficulties, a problem of almost manageable size. As they sped on through the evening, she gained enough confidence that she could almost enjoy the spectacle. Once they skimmed past a squirrel, big as an office building, which turned a vast liquid brown eye to watch them. Other insects, a large moth and a few mosquitoes fluttering along on errands of their own, passed the hopper without a second glance, like bored commuters pacing on a station platform. The moth was beautiful at this size, covered with a feathery gray pelt, each faceted eye a cluster of dark mirrors. The distance between trees had grown wider, as much as a quarter minute or more now separating each gargantuan trunk. Tendrils of mist drifted upward from the ground, twining among the branches and obscuring vision. But before Rini could add this to her catalog of worries, the forest finally dropped away behind them. A strip of beach flashed past, then nothing lay below but gray-green water. "The river! We are here!" She didn't dare take her hands off the wheel to clap, so she bounced in her padded seat. "You have done well, Rini," Kabu said. "Shall we look for the others?" "We can try. I don't know that we'll find them, though. They might have got back on the boat and headed on downstream." She tipped the hopper into a long, gradual turn. It was much less smooth in flight than the dragonfly, which had a wider wingspan, and it juddered as the wind shifted, but she had not hurried the turn, so she was able to straighten the little craft out again and head it along the river's flow. It was true that these virtual planes were made for scientists to use, not professional flyers, but she was still proud of herself. And unfortunately, before I get to any significant stopping space, there's several pages left. So it will have to wait for next week, folks. I apologize for that, but it is now 8:01 and is only getting later. It is only getting later every moment. So I'm going to cut it loose there, and I will thank you all for joining me. I will be back, barring fire, flood, acts of God, acts of dog. I will be back, because fortunately she doesn't come down here, so I don't have to worry about her chewing up my microphone or something. But I will be back, as far as I know, next week. Same TAD time, same TAD channel. I look forward to whomever among you decides to join me. In the interim, take good care of yourselves, take good care of your friends and loved ones, the people around you, and keep an eye out for those you may not always notice, but who might need a kind word, a smile, a couple of bucks, whatever the case might be. Pay it forward. Pay it forward. If you're lucky enough to feel secure yourself, or even mostly secure, pay something forward. Anyway, with that, I thank you. Peace. Be well. I will see you very soon. Hasta la vista, mis amigos. And ciao.